my guide took me to these different places on the other side. The very last place he took me to was a meadow, and it was the most beautiful meadow I have ever seen. So I turned around, and there was a gentleman standing in front of me. He had brown hair, he had a white robe on. I could see his hands, I could see his legs. He was wearing a golden sash around his waist, and he had gold-colored sandals on that laced up his calves all the way to his knees. And it was Jesus. He was different because when I tried to see his face, there was only light coming out of it. I couldn't see any of his features. And he spoke to me, and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." And instantly, right when he said that, I popped right back into the hospital room, and I was looking up at everybody looking down at me.
Well, hello, John J. Davis. Welcome to the show. I am truly honored by you joining me and looking forward to our conversation. How are you feeling today?
I am doing great, Brad. Thanks so much for having me on. I always enjoy sharing my story, and I hope that your audience can take a lot of hope away from my story. That's what I'm here for.
Well, I'm familiar with your story, and I know my audience is going to love it. And I got to tell you, every week we bring you powerful stories just like this about life and death, awakening, and what it means to be human. And if that resonates, you will love what's coming. Today, I am joined by John J. Davis, who had a near-death experience at the age of 21 that was really unlike almost any other I've come across, sort of vivid and detailed and utterly life-changing. Now, he didn't just glimpse the afterlife. He was given a guided tour from soul planning halls and past lives to heavenly orientation centers. And finally, a message from Jesus himself. And that message was clear. You must tell them there is no death, was the message. And that is what he's sharing around the world in every moment that he can. So today, John is here to do exactly that. So welcome, John. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Brad. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm so familiar with your story because I did watch a recording of yours and couldn't love it anymore. You know, it really feels to me like you were handpicked out of the universe to go to the other side, to have this extensive experience of what the other side is like, given explicit instructions to come back and share that. And I think that's exactly what you're doing today.
Yeah. It's weird you mentioned that because I've always wondered, why did they give it to me? I don't have a podcast like you. I don't have a book. I don't have anything. So I don't know why they gave it to me instead of giving this to someone like Oprah, who already has a huge audience. So I've done exactly what you said. I've always tried to do what they told me, to try to share my story and give people the kind of hope that it's given me.
I think it was given to you specifically so that it could relate to the common man and the common woman, that it isn't a special thing, that it's for everyone to understand and to feel. Now, you experience so that you have a knowing. Other people just love listening to these conversations so that they can actually, sort of become this knowing experience that you have, and that's what they love about it. Now, what I want to do today is I want to give you the stage and the microphone to tell your story. And then when you're done with the story, I got a series of questions, and I just want to get real interactive with you and dig in and pull out some additional morsels. Sound good?
Sure. Sounds fantastic. Sounds great.
All right. Well, the stage and the microphone is yours.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Brad. Well, I'll start how the whole thing started was my dad was in sales for his whole career. He loved doing sales. And one year he won a sales contest, and he won 2 mopeds, or what we would call scooters today. And we used to ride these things all over the neighborhood. Well, one day I was out and I was riding, and I had an accident and I slammed into a tree. And what happened is I tore the tendons off my right hand, and I had to go into surgery to have them repaired. Well, I had never ever had surgery before. I was only 21 when this whole thing happened, so I didn't know what to expect. So the day the surgery comes, my mom drives me to the hospital or to the clinic, and when they start to give me the anesthesia, something happened, and I had this horrible allergic reaction, and it stopped my heart. And I was clinically dead for 7 minutes. And during that period of time, to me, it seemed like it was an hour or two, but I was only gone for 7 minutes. And I had what we now call a near-death experience, an NDE. And that event has totally changed the entire trajectory of my life. And I was given a message to share my story with anybody who will listen because it will give them hope just as much as it gave me hope. And I want to tell your audience a little bit of the backstory here. You know how a lot of times you hear about people who have a near death experience, that they find themselves floating above their bodies looking down at the scene, and it's either from some kind of an accident or like what I had in an operating room. And then they start moving down a tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel they see a white light. But before they get there, many times they're told by somebody who passed before them, a family member, a friend, who tells them it's not your time, you have to go back. So we never knew what's on the other side of that white light. What is the light? Well, what's so interesting about my story is it starts on the other side of that white light. That's where I started, and I'll explain that in just a second. So my heart stops. I officially died. The next instant, I opened my eyes, and I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. It was beautiful white marble, and it was so long, such a long building, I couldn't see the end of it. And my first thought was, I had no idea the hospital was this large because I didn't even know that I had passed. I think if I had known that ahead of time, or if I knew that, I would have asked so many more questions. But I didn't know what happened. Well, right about then, in my left ear, I hear, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." Well, I had never heard of a spirit guide. I had no idea who he was. But he took me on this journey of heaven, or what we call the other side. And every time he took me somewhere, he was talking to me. And I heard everything he said, and he was telling me different things about what I was seeing, where I was, what was happening. That's why I'm able to be able to tell your audience everything that happened. And what's so interesting is that normally I don't have a very good memory, but I remember every single detail of what happened back in 1987. And I think that must be a gift from God, that I was supposed to remember everything like it happened yesterday so that I can tell people and let them know that there's nothing to be afraid of when we pass. It's all designed by God, and we all have to pass. That's the whole process of coming here. We have to leave at some point, and that's what we call death, and that's how we go back home again. So I'm standing in this beautiful white marble building. On the right hand side of me, all the way down as far as you can see, were these tall 20 or 30-foot marble columns, absolutely beautiful. And in the center were these tables, just like a regular kitchen table, and they had benches on each side. They looked like marble, beautiful white marble, again, as far down as you could see. The most extraordinary part about this was on the left-hand side. I looked over, and there were tunnels. There were doorways. They looked like they had been cut out of solid marble. Beautiful, just 90-degree angled doorways. And if you looked in them, you couldn't see anything. It looked like space, completely black. And again, going all the way down as far as you could see. And my guide, he told me, this is the orientation center. And what's interesting about the guide is that I learned every one of us, before we come into a lifetime, we actually have someone over there who we know, who helps us plan our life. They help us plan what we want to accomplish, what kind of experiences we want to have to learn what we want to learn. Because that's one of the primary reasons that we come here, is to learn and to grow. And he was telling me, let me back up. At these tables, all the way down, there were two people sitting at every one of these tables. And my guide said, these are orientation counselors. Well, on the other side, everybody seems to have particular jobs, things that they love to do. They don't have to have jobs like we have here to pay bills and expenses. Over there, they do the things that they love to do more than anything else. And the people that were here at these tables, they're called orientation counselors. Well, right about then, my guide said, "Look to your left, look at the next tunnel." So I looked up, and there was a man coming through this tunnel. He was an elderly gentleman. He was probably in his 80s or his 90s. And he had his right hand holding his chest like he had pain. And my guide said he just passed from a heart attack. Well, one of these orientation counselors, she was a woman. She stood up. She walked over to him. She took his hands in hers, and she led him back down to the table. And they sat across from each other. And she started talking to him. And she never let go of his hands. She held his hands the entire time. And my guide said, the orientation counselors are there to help people remember where they're from. Because most of us, when we leave the other side to come into a lifetime, we don't remember it. It's like our minds, it's like we have this amnesia about where we're really from. And when people pass, many times they're confused about where they are. And that's the job of the orientation counselors. They help them remember that this is where you're from. You just finished a lifetime on Earth, and now you're back home again. And my guide said to watch him. He said to watch this gentleman who just came through. So I'm watching him, and all of a sudden, Brad, the craziest thing, his whole appearance changed. He changed from a man who was in his 80s or 90s to a man who was in his early 30s. And I could see this counselor talking to him, but I was too far away to hear what she was saying. But he changed. And my guide said, everybody on the other side is in their early 30s. And I didn't think to ask why. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because Jesus was in his 30s or that's just the perfect age. I don't know. But everybody on the other side is in their early 30s. Well, this gentleman, once he got his memory back about where he was from the other side, I just finished my lifetime and I'm back home now. He stands up. He walks off to the right. He walks down 3 steps into what I call the gardens. I don't know if the other side calls it that, but that's what it looked like to me. He walked into the most beautiful, ornate, gorgeous gardens I have ever seen. Absolutely perfect green grass and trees and flowers. It looked like, have you ever seen those gardens in England where they have the perfect manicured? That's what this looked like. And there were all these people who were standing there. And my guide said, everybody has a reunion. So when this gentleman passed, all these people who he had known in his lifetime, who passed before him, whether it was good friends or family members, parents, cousins, aunts, everybody that he knew was on the other side waiting for him. And my guide said, the reason that they're there is coming to this planet, Earth. It's a really big deal to them because the Earth is such a hard place to come to. And the reason is that there are many, many souls who don't want to come here because it is too hard. So when we come into a lifetime, everybody really roots for us on the other side. It's a really big deal when we come into a life. And all these people were there to greet this gentleman. Everybody was applauding and clapping and hugging him. It was just a really fantastic, it was like a reunion. And they were all waiting for him. Well, the one thing that I've always wondered is when I was in that orientation building, there were no computers on these tables. There were no papers. There was nothing there to tell them who's coming through these tunnels when a person's lifetime is finished. So I don't know how those orientation counselors know when a person's life is finished. But they all know who's coming through and when. And all the people that were there to greet this gentleman, they knew ahead of time also. It has to be a God thing, I don't know how anybody would know that, but they do. They know when we're coming back home again. And what's so fantastic is my guide told me that none of us ever dies alone. Even if you're in a hospital and no one is there, and that's how you pass, the other side always sends someone to get us. So none of us ever pass by ourselves. So this gentleman was in this garden. Everybody was applauding and hugging him and saying, "You made it, fantastic job." And that's the first part of what I saw with my near-death experience. Well, then my guide, Alan, started taking me to these different places on the other side. And the best way that I can describe it, it's like if you were ever on a college campus. You know how college campuses have their English building here, you've got your science building, maybe your history building. That's kind of like what it felt like where I was. My guide didn't tell me what part of the other side I was in, just that most of the buildings that I saw were beautiful white marble column buildings, and there were people everywhere. So wherever I was, it was a really busy place, a lot of activity. So then what happened is he started to take me to these different places. The first one he took me to was this beautiful rectangular building, white, beautiful white columns. And I can't even begin to tell you how large this was. We have nothing here on Earth that is close to how large this building was. It was kind of like bigger than the Egyptian pyramids, just huge. So he took me to the outside of every one of these places first so I could tell people what I was seeing. And then he took me to the inside. So he takes me to the inside of this first building and takes me to a room. And it was a round room, like this, just a round, large room. And it looked like a movie theater, just a round one. And up on the top, there were these movie screens, just like we would see in a regular theater. And they were all in a circle. There must have been 15 or 20 of these movie screens. And my guide said, "This is a life review." And what he told me was that every time any one of us finishes a lifetime, we all have a life review. And the purpose of the life review is to see how we did in that lifetime. Well, all of a sudden, every one of these screens started playing a movie. I thought it was movies. But what it was every screen that was turned on was playing a different episode of my lifetime. One screen was showing me as a little infant. Another screen showed me as a toddler. Another screen showed me on my first day of kindergarten. Another screen showed me when I was in elementary school playing soccer. And every screen had a different part of my life playing up to the age that I was, which was 21. And my guide said, this is the best way that a soul learns, by having a life review. And there's two reasons for that. The first thing is that you see every good thing that you did in your lifetime. Like one of the screens was playing an episode that I forgot about, that years ago. I was in the playground in elementary school, and we had a classmate. His name was Troy, and he had to walk with, I think he had MS or Parkinson's, and he had to walk with crutches. Well, one day he was out in the playground and he fell, and I ran over to him and picked him up, gave him his crutches back, and I never thought anything about that. But when I was watching that screen, I could feel what Troy felt, and his thanking me for helping him stand up and get his crutches back. Well, I had never thought anything about that. It was no big deal. But to him, it was a big deal, and we feel that. Well, the other thing also is that the life review also shows you anything you did if you hurt somebody. You feel what other people feel. Like if somebody intentionally went out to hurt somebody in their lifetime, part of the life review is that they will feel what that person felt. And that's how the soul learns. That's one of the primary ways that all of us learn is by how our actions affect others. And that was called the life review. And I was just blown away. Everything I was seeing was so extraordinary, and that the whole thing just kept going from one place to the next. Well, the next place he took me to, again, was another huge building with white marble columns. He takes me to the inside and takes me to a room that this one looked like a regular movie theater. What we would go today to go see like a Marvel movie, for example. And in it was, at the very front of the room, was a big movie screen. And my guide said, I want to show you past lifetimes. Well, this was something that was really difficult for me because I don't know if the show you saw me on before where I mentioned that I was raised Catholic. My dad was very Catholic, and he used to take my sister and I to church 3 times a week and then also on Sunday. So I grew up in the Catholic faith, and never once did they ever talk about past lifetimes. But my guide said, I want to show you past lifetimes. And all of a sudden, the screen lit up, and it was like a movie was playing, and it was me. I looked. It was a movie playing, like I was an elderly gentleman, maybe in my 80s, and I had a shaved head, and I was wearing a red gown or a robe, and I was in a monastery. And my job in that lifetime was to teach little kids about how to become a monk. I was a monk in that life. Then all of a sudden it went blank. Another one came up. Again, it was another one of my lifetimes, and I was a shoe peddler. I had a wheelbarrow, a wooden wheelbarrow, and I had all of these shoes stacked on it. And this was a lifetime where I fixed people's shoes. And I put them in the wheelbarrow, and I would take them back to the village where all these people lived and passed out their shoes that I fixed. The third life he showed me was of a fisherman, and I was standing in a boat on a lake, and it was either an ocean or a lake, and I knew that this life had happened somewhere in the Middle East, and I had nets, and I was tossing these nets into the water, and part of my job in that life was to get fish to feed the village. And it was so amazing to me to realize that we really do have past lifetimes. And the reason is that God, when he created us, I think what he did, it's part of like our spiritual DNA. He put inside of us the desire to learn, to always want to grow, to always improve. And one of the things he did for us was give us the ability to have lifetimes on other planets. And I'll mention this in just a little bit, but Earth is not the only planet we can go to. There are other worlds that we can have lifetimes on. And so that was where he took me to see past lifetimes. And after a while, it made sense because we have been around forever. We never die. And of course, if you want to have more lifetimes, you can. But it's totally up to the individual soul. Nobody makes us choose a lifetime. Just like our lives right now, we all chose to be here at this particular time. We all come in for different reasons, but we don't have to. On the other side, it was explained to me that everything you like to do here on Earth, you can do on the other side. If you want to go hiking, if you want to go swimming, if you want to take classes or go to music festivals, all of those same things that we like to do here, we can do over there. And I thought that was fantastic because I love nature. I love oceans and parks and mountains, and all of those things are on the other side also. It's not just here. Well, that was what's called a life review. And we all go through the life review when we get back. Everybody has to go through it. Well, the next building he took me to was this beautiful, round, domed building. And what it looked like, there's a building in Rome. I forget what it's called, but it's got a big dome on it. That's kind of what this building looked like. and it had white marble columns, just like you would see in Greece, all around, kind of like the circumference of this building. And my guide said that this is where we go when we plan a lifetime. And I wish I would have asked him why. Why do we go to these different places? But I didn't know at the time to ask that. He just told me that this was what this building was for and showed me the outside of all of them and then took me to the inside. So we go to the inside of this big domed building, and he walks me up to a table, a white marble table, and there was a scroll. It looked like an Egyptian papyrus scroll, or wound in a like a tube, like a scroll, and there was a blue ribbon around it. And my guide explained to me that we actually plan our lifetimes ahead of time. And it's kind of like, have you ever written out New Year's resolutions? Like from like at the end of the year, what you want to accomplish for the next year? That's kind of what this felt like. So I picked up the scroll and I took off this blue ribbon and I did this. I laid it out on the table and I could instantly see that the lettering was all black and it looked like calligraphy. Remember when you were a kid and you went to elementary school and they had a class one day where you took an ink pen, dipped it in this ink well, and they had you write some different things to see what it was like? And they called it calligraphy. That's kind of what this papyrus looked like, that all of my writing was in calligraphy. And my guide explained to me that everything gets planned. And what he meant was that you plan what country you're going to have a lifetime in. You plan who your parents are going to be. What language are you going to learn? Are you going to go to college? What kind of career do you think you might want to pursue? Are you going to have children? All of these things go into a lifetime. So none of us we're not random accidents. We all come here for different reasons. And it's all for the main purpose of learning and developing. And my guide said that there are really two reasons why we come here. The first one is to learn and to grow. And the second reason is to help others. And there is something that I read years ago from the Dalai Lama. He said something that has stuck with me all these years, and it's how I think we try to live our lives. He said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. And that's something that I have tried to do my whole life because that's what the other side wants us to do. We come here to learn. Of course, that's the number one thing. And the second is to try to help others along their journey. Because all of us will go through our Mount Everest moments. We all have hard times. And that's one of the reasons that we come here is because if you look at your life 10 years ago, who you were back then and who you are today, what made us who we are today are the tough things that we survived. Because on the other side, it was explained to me that there is nothing on the other side, or heaven, or the afterlife, that causes any kind of pain. There's no starvation, there's no homelessness, there's no poverty, there's no war. None of those things exist over there. They only exist here. And souls want to come here to test themselves because you learn the best when you go through something tough. And that's one of the primary reasons why we're here. And the second reason is, of course, to try to make a difference and help others along their journey too. So that was the building with the big dome on top. This next one, Brad, I think is probably my most favorite part of my whole NDE. Because I have since I was a kid, I have always loved science fiction and loved learning about galaxies and planets and stars. I grew up watching the original Star Trek. I would watch reruns of Star Trek with Captain Kirk. And that's kind of what got me interested in science fiction and the planets and galaxies and solar systems. So my guide, he takes me to a building, and this one was different than all the rest. This one was a big sprawling building. It looked like it was some kind of metal, and it looked like a stadium, kind of like we would go see a football game or a soccer game. This huge, big stadium. So he takes me to the inside, and inside are thousands of seats. And I knew every single this whole building was lit up. There were lights everywhere. It was super bright inside, and I could see all these empty seats. And what it was, do you remember when you were a kid and you took field trips to planetariums? Did you ever do that? You know how they have those, it's kind of a round ceiling? That's what this building was. And my guide told me this was a planetarium. Well, behind me, there was a gentleman. And I don't know why I never turned around. I never turned around to look at who this was, but there was a gentleman behind me. And he said, "Let's begin." And all of a sudden, all the lights went off. It was completely dark. And he spoke to me and he said, "When you look at the stars, this is what you see." And what he meant was that everybody at our level of development, at that time of our technology, we knew what our planets were. And all of a sudden, our solar system started showing up on the ceiling. He showed our sun, he showed Earth, then Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Neptune, all the planets in our solar system showed up. And then it went blank. And then he said, "When we look at the stars, this is what we see." And he was referring to all the people on the other side who already had this knowledge, knowing that there are other planets out there. And all of a sudden, planet after planet after planet started showing up on the ceiling. And he said, "There is far more life in the universe than you can possibly know." And at first it was a dozen planets, then hundreds, then thousands, and then millions of planets started showing up. And I think that they wanted me to know two things about this. The first one was that Earth is not the only inhabited planet. Just because we haven't discovered any other races or other worlds doesn't mean they're not there. Earth is only one. And then the second reason was that there are millions of other planets that we can have lifetimes on. And I want to share something with your audience about astronomy, because I think it's going to make a lot more sense to understand how many different planets there really are. And if you look at the Milky Way galaxy, just our home galaxy where planet Earth is, it is so large that if we had a spaceship that could travel at the speed of light, which is the fastest speed that we know is 186,000 miles a second, that's the speed of light. Well, how astronomers measure distance in space is how far light travels in a year. They call it a light year. And if we had a ship at one edge of our galaxy and started flying across our galaxy at the speed of light, it would take 100,000 years to get to the other end, just of our galaxy, just the Milky Way. And astronomers estimate that in our galaxy alone are 100 billion planets and 400 billion stars. And that's just the Milky Way. They think now with the knowledge that they've gotten from the Hubble telescope and now the James Webb telescope, they think that there are upwards of 2 trillion galaxies in the universe. And if you think about that, it's absolutely mind-blowing. Do you remember Carl Sagan? He had a show called Cosmos. He was the first to say that they believe that all the sand on Earth, every single sand, that there's more planets in the universe than there are grains of sand on Earth. I can't even imagine that. And what's so fascinating is that we can have lifetimes on virtually unlimited number of planets, that Earth is only one. It's only one option. And when we come here, it's almost like it was explained to me, it's like being a warrior, being a fighter, that everybody who comes here has to be strong because there's so many things we all go through. But we learn tremendous amounts of knowledge when we finish a lifetime and go back home. Well, that was the planetarium. I think that was probably my favorite part of my whole experience. Well, the next place he took me to was this huge, sprawling, another gigantic marble building. It didn't have columns on the side. It only had columns in the front. And like maybe 50 stairs you had to walk up to get to the front. It was kind of like what our Supreme Court building looks like. It looked kind of like that, with all the steps leading up to it and then all the marble columns out front. So we go on the inside, and it's a library. And there were bookshelves as far down as you could see, books everywhere. And there were people. And this was the first time that I actually saw all these different people. They're people, they look just like we do. They wear clothes. Sometimes people would wear t-shirts and jeans. Other times people wore robes or tunics. But there was just people everywhere. And in this library, people were visiting. Some people were looking for books. Other people were studying. And my guide took me to the left-hand side of this library. And on the left-hand side, there were these rooms. And they looked like about the size of somebody's average living room in their house. Kind of like, and they even have study rooms now in libraries you can reserve. They looked kind of like that, like study rooms. So he takes me to this one room, and there was a woman sitting there. She had jet black hair straight all the way down to her waist. She had like a purple kind of a gown, maroon kind of a gown on. And she had her back to me, and she was watching what looked like what we would call today a flat screen television mounted on the wall. And it was big. It was like 50 or 60 inches, this big screen. Well, back in 1987, when I had my experience, we didn't have TVs like that. They were the huge, big, bulky televisions, and you couldn't have them on a wall. So I was just amazed to see this flat screen TV. And my guide said, "Look at what she's watching." So I looked up, and I thought that she was watching a movie, because what it was a battle that was occurring between a Native American tribe and the United States cavalry 200 years ago. And I thought, oh, how is that possible? Because we didn't have video cameras back then. How could she be watching a movie where there was no video cameras? And my guide said she was watching literal history. She was watching a battle that had taken place between Native American Indians, Plains tribes, and the United States cavalry, and she was watching it as it actually happened. And my thought was, how is that possible? How can she possibly be watching something when there were no cameras back then? And my guide said, everything gets recorded. And I wish I would have asked him how that's possible, but I didn't know to ask him that. So I just know that on the other side, anything in your lifetime or in anybody's life or in any historical period, you can go to these libraries on the other side and you can watch living history. And that excited me because I have always loved history. And one of the things I want to do when I get back is I want to go to one of these rooms and I want to watch what it was like for those young men in World War II to invade Normandy, the D-Day invasion. I would like to see what that was like for them. And anything that you want to learn about in terms of history, you can go to these rooms and you can watch anything in history. And I thought that was just absolutely extraordinary because I'm such a history buff. And that was the library. This next one was also something that was really incredible for me too. So we leave that building, and he takes me to a castle, and it looked just like a kind of castle that you would see in England or France or Scotland, but it was huge. It was all it was all constructed out of stone, and it looked like it was made yesterday. Absolutely perfect, pristine, beautiful castle. And my guide told me that on the other side, we can also learn. You don't have to come into a lifetime as the only way to learn. But to come into a lifetime gives you experiential learning. Whereas on the other side, it's you just learn by reading or studying or viewing things. Whereas on a lifetime on Earth, you can actually experience it. Well, he said to me that on the other side, if you want to learn about how people lived at a certain period, you can come to this place. And this was only one example of all of them, and it was a castle. So if you were on the other side and you wanted to learn about what it was like in medieval Europe on Earth, you could come to this place, you could see this castle and see what people lived in. So he told me to walk in. So we walk inside the castle, and the first thing I noticed was the sprawling red carpet everywhere. And it made you feel like royalty when you walked in. And on both sides of the castle walls, there were life-size paintings of people. And what they were life-size paintings of people like kings and queens and princes and princesses who had lived in these castles in medieval Europe. And in front of every one of these pictures, there was a podium. And on the podium was a book. And it looked like the books were just laid open like this. And what it was a book about that person's lifetime. So if you wanted to learn about King George or Queen Anne, for example, you could go to this castle. You could look at what they looked like to see what they looked like and what they wore. And then you could read this book about their lives because their lifetime was public knowledge. You could learn about them by reading this book about their lifetime. Well, right about then, I looked off to my right, and there was you remember how castles back then had those circular stairwells? You walked around like this. There was a woman who was walking down this stairwell, and she had kind of strawberry blonde hair, and she was wearing kind of a peach colored gown or a robe. And she walked up to me, and she talked to me, and I said the stupidest thing I could ever say. She said to me, "Is there anything I can help you find?" Well, instead of saying, "What in the world is going on?" I said to her, "No thanks, I'm just looking." And I can't, even to this day, I still kick myself because I could have asked her anything. Where am I? What's happening? I thought I was supposed to be having surgery. But I didn't ask her that. Instead, I said, "No, thank you, I'm just looking." Well, my guide told me that on the other side, this girl loves to study history. She loves, in particular, medieval history. So if you're on the other side and you wanted to learn about that part of Earth's history, you could go to this castle, you could look at the paintings, you could read about these people in the book, and you could also ask her any question about that particular type of or that time in history. She was like what we would call a professor on the other side. And my guide said that most of us spend our time doing the things that we love to do. And what this girl loved to do was to study history. So she was a professor of that particular era of Earth's history. And that was fascinating. I just love that. Well, that brings me to the very last part of my experience. This entire time, my guide took me to these different places on the other side, And where I was only a small area. It certainly wasn't everything. It was just a small area. So the very last place he took me to was a meadow, and it was the most beautiful meadow I have ever seen. Beautiful grass and flowers, rolling hills. The sun was out. It was a perfect day. And then he disappeared. He left. And I thought I was standing there by myself. So I turned around, and there was a gentleman standing in front of me. And he had brown hair. He had a white robe on. I could see his hands. I could see his legs. He was wearing a golden sash around his waist. And he had gold colored sandals on that laced up his calves all the way to his knees. And it was Jesus. And the being that we call Jesus in this lifetime, this was Jesus. He was different because when I tried to see his face, there was only light coming out of it. I couldn't see any of his features. But everybody else I saw, they looked just like we do. Everybody has their own look. Some people are taller, some are shorter, some have blonde hair. Every race, every ethnicity was there, but they all look like we do. But Jesus was different because I couldn't see his face. There was so much light. And he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." And instantly, right when he said that, I popped right back into the hospital room and I was looking up at everybody looking down at me. And that's how my experience ended when he said, "You must tell them there is no death." So ever since then, I have just always shared my story and tried to give people hope to not be afraid of dying because there's nothing to be afraid of. What actually happens, the happiest day any of us will ever have is our last because we're getting to go home again. And there's nothing to be afraid about dying. It's how God set it up. And that's how we get home again. And that, Brad, that's my story.
Wow, that is the most amazing story.
It's crazy, I know. It's a crazy story.
It just feels like you were selected to go to the other side to experience all that. And what's different in a lot of NDEs is to remember every part of that, to bring it back purposefully to tell folks. Now, why do you think that it was so important to tell the message to folks that there is no death? And why do you think folks that you would meet on a daily basis don't understand that?
I've thought about that a lot. And when I had my initial experience back in 1987, and when I realized what had happened, I had a horrible, horrible depression. It took me probably 2 months to really understand what happened because I didn't want to be here. I wanted to be where I was. I wanted to go back there again. I didn't want to stay here. But then when I thought back to what Jesus had said, he didn't say it in a way, he didn't say, "You know what, John, when it's convenient for you, when you have time, when you're not busy, would you mind sharing what we showed you?" It wasn't like that. He said, "You must tell them there is no death." And when I finally got that, when I realized the importance of what he told me, that's when I realized that I'm supposed to go out and share this. I'm supposed to tell people what I saw. And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since then, just sharing my story.
Have you done it in a live audience as well? And what's the response been?
You know, I did actually. I went to an IANS conference in Tampa, Florida, about 4 years ago, and I was able to share my story to a live audience, and I had a great time. They had fantastic questions for me. It was really a good time.
That audience is built for it. They actually paid, admission fees to come and hear those stories. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's a greater audience when you do recordings like this, and it's made available to anybody on YouTube who wants to click and listen. And it'd be interesting when people hear it for the first time. That's the purpose of you sharing this. Now, what do you think? How does you sharing this? How does this change the world if more and more and more people really realize this?
I think the biggest thing for me was in terms of religion. because I was being raised Catholic. I was always afraid that there was going to be some kind of a judgment day. I was afraid of the whole idea of hell. And if you don't please God, you're going to be sent to hell. Well, I found out during my NDE that God never created a hell. There isn't a hell. It's almost it's I can never explain this how it really felt, but on the other side when you're there, you can feel God. You can feel how much God loves and cherishes every single one of us. And you just know that he would never throw somebody away, toss somebody into a pit of fire for eternity. And it's just like us. Any of us who have children, we would never think of tossing our own children into a place like hell. You would give your children as many times, as many opportunities as they need to learn. And that's exactly what God does. Hell was invented by man. It was invented by religion, not God. So I think that was the most profound lesson that I learned. And I think if the world were to understand that there is no judgment, no one's going to judge you. You judge yourself. That's the purpose of the life review. The only person that goes with you in your life review is your guide, the person that helped you plan your life in the first place. But there is no judgment. All of that was man-made. And I think if the world understood that there is no such thing as judgment, there's no punishment, no one's going to be judged, I think that would make the world just a much happier place.
I hear what you're saying about there's no judgment on the other side. It's unconditional love from the Creator.
Yes.
And through the life review, we would be judging what we had done. But we wouldn't be judging and condemning ourselves. It feels like we would be just observing and learning and growing from that experience.
Exactly. Yeah, there is no condemnation. The whole purpose of the life review is to be a learning tool. Because we all come here because we want to do our best. It's kind of like testing yourself. You want to come here to see how you do. You make it through something difficult, who you become as a result, all the different things you go through make you a better person. And that's one of the reasons why we come here in the first place. But yeah, there is no condemnation of any kind. There's no judgment. In fact, when I was standing there looking at Jesus, I felt the most extraordinary love that came from him. And it was a feeling like they don't care what religion you follow. All they care about is that whatever religion you follow brings you closer to God. You don't have to be a Christian. You don't have to be a Jew. You don't have to be a Hindu or a Muslim. It doesn't matter to them. All that matters is that you become a better person, in that you try to get closer to God. They don't care about religion over there.
I kind of feel an analogy coming on here based on this discussion. Like, it's kind of like I'm an actor, okay? I'm a famous actor and I do a bunch of movies. And I start my career off by doing this particular movie, and I'm this character doing that, and then I go into the theater and watch it, and I review my performance. Oh my goodness, I can do much better. And then I do another movie, different character, different, and then you go ahead and watch in a theater that review. I review my. It's kind of like that. It's like on the other side, we might be these eternal spiritual beings, and then we choose a character to manifest into in physical form. And, we have a veil of forgetfulness, so that's good. We don't want to influence it. We go cranking through this life, and then we go back, sit in a movie theater, and see how we did as a character in that movie. What do you think?
That is a fantastic analogy. I have never thought of that. That's exactly what it's like.
Yeah, it just came up. And, the difference, I guess, is in the world of an actor, you got all sorts of critics out there writing good or bad things about you.
Yeah.
But no, God's not a critic, okay? So you're the only one. And from that, you definitely learn and grow, and away you go. Now, the notion of the veil of forgetfulness, to me, it kind of feels like we really have to have that. Because if we had hundreds or maybe even thousands of prior lives, each one of those lives ended somehow. It probably ended in, like, terrible, painful, awful, traumatic, whatever,
Yeah.
and we certainly can't take that into this life. It would influence it too greatly.
I
So the veil of
yeah.
forgetfulness means that we can't remember all those prior lives, but we really don't remember a lot. It feels like you're here not to remind us of the prior lives, but remind us of who we ultimately are on the other side.
That is a great explanation because I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of us come in here, we live our lifetimes, and we try to remember who we really are. Because I know that when I was a kid, I remember when my great grandmother passed. She passed when she was when I was 11 years old, and back then, I don't know if they do it now, but back then they had you could walk up to the casket and see this loved one and say your final goodbyes. Well, I remember when I saw my grandmother laying there, I remember thinking everything that she was, it can't possibly be the end. There's got to be more. How could that be the end of this woman who had such an incredible sense of humor, very kind, loving woman? How could that be the end? And it never made sense to me. I knew there always had to be something more. And when I had my NDE, that confirmed it for me that there is so much more. And what makes it so much fun for me is being able to share my story is I can tell people that yeah, I know you lost your spouse or you lost a child, but they're not really gone because nobody really dies. They just go to a different place. And what we have to do as survivors, we have to get through every day until it's our time to go. Because I can guarantee you that when it's your time, they're going to be there. And you're going to have all of those people with you again. And all the pain, all the suffering that you went through in life, it all disappears when you get back. And it all makes sense. And you become so much more than who you were before you came into that lifetime because you learn from it. And that's the idea, to grow and to learn and to become more.
You know, and it goes back into the topic you had on life planning. If you lose someone near and dear to you in this life, you planned it.
Yes,
That was what you planned, and you did it specifically to experience that emotion and that pain. So
exactly.
feel that pain, wash it through you, but don't, suffer for 25 years over
Exactly.
it. But feel it for sure for what it is, and that energy will explode and flow through you, and then move on. And all the while, as painful as it might be, realize two things. One, that you said they will be there for you on the other side as you go. But the other thing is, this is what you planned in your life. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about life planning. It kind of feels like we have a blueprint, because this question always comes up. How rigid is the blueprint, and then how much free will is there along it?
Sure, sure. That's a great question. God created all of us with free will. He, of course, wants us to love Him, but He doesn't make us. He wants us to choose that. And when I was in remember the dome building where the scroll was? I forgot to mention this part. Well, I looked over to my right, and there was this huge, gigantic wall, and the wall was full of scrolls. Everybody who was having a lifetime who had a scroll on the wall was in on Earth having a lifetime. That's where they held all these scrolls. And my guide took my scroll from the wall and put it on that table. And I could see all the writing, but when I tried to read it, it folded up again and I wasn't able to read it. And I think because if I had known ahead of time what I had planned, I may have done something differently to make sure I didn't do that. But the planning, in terms of how much of it is written in stone, all I know for sure is that we plan what country we're going to come into, what language we're going to learn, who our parents are going to be. Are we going to go to a university? Are we going to have kids? What kind of a career do we want to have? Those are the main things, the main elements of your lifetime that will happen. But Earth is not a perfect place. It's subject to accidents, things happening we don't plan for. But the major points of what you want to learn from are going to happen. And one of those is how we're going to pass. How do we finish that lifetime and go back? Because that's one of the most important things that we plan for, because that's how we get back. But there are a lot of things that aren't planned for that do happen. Like you don't plan to, like on June 30th, 2029, you're going to have lunch in this restaurant. That it's not that kind of detail. That's totally free will. But the major points of your lifetime, like if you are on your deathbed and you look back at your life and you look at the major points, those are the things that you plan for. Those are the things that aren't going to be optional.
Yeah, it kind of feels like there's mile markers along the way. You
Yes,
can do what you want between the mile markers, but you're going to hit that mile marker. And
exactly.
those were challenges and objectives that you had created for yourself specifically. That's your path. And it feels like on your blueprint, you can say, is this going to be a super tough life? Boom, 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 boom. Or is it
Yeah,
going to be, I had enough of those for a while. I want it to be a little easier life this
exactly.
time.
Yeah, that's what we consider. Absolutely. Yep.
And also the thing is cool is the notion of a soul group. If you're with, a number of people in your soul group and you remanifest into these experiences kind of over and over, and this time I'm the parent, you're the child, this time I'm the neighbor, the crazy neighbor, and you're the, whatever.
Yep.
And, you could pick different experiences that you ask each other, you contract each other to give each other.
That's true. That is exactly true. I wish I had known to ask that. I didn't know anything about soul groups until many, many years later.
Well, what I got now is a series of questions that I have all prepared ahead of time, and I walk through these. This is called Heart's First Whisper. This is the notion of a quick little series of questions, and your heart pours out the answer. No thinking involved. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Excellent. All right, the first one. When do you feel closest to God or divine presence in your daily life?
That's a great question. What I've done for probably the last 15 or 20 years is every morning before I get up, I set an alarm for 15 minutes on my phone, and I call that my God time. That's the time where I slow down my thoughts, I meditate, I talk to God, and it's when I tell him my fears, my concerns, my worries. And every time I do one of these shows or talk to anybody who has lost a loved one, I always ask God to help me say what is going to be important to help somebody. What is the most important thing that I can say to help your listeners, other people who have lost loved ones and are struggling? And I always ask in those meditations to help me be the best that I can be, help me say the right thing that's going to help people. And that's when I feel the closest to God. Another point that I think a lot of people can relate to this is I like to go for a walk with my dog in the late afternoon, and we have a park just a couple blocks from our house, and there are beautiful trees and nature, and I always feel close to God when I walk in nature. Or like when we talked earlier today about being from California and going to the beach, I always felt close to God when I would just sit on the beach and watch the waves come in. Usually it's always being in nature that has been such a powerful point of contact for me, and I think it's like that for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing you mentioned in there was another point of presence with God is your dog, right? And so I know in prior conversations I've heard you talk about the pets that are in our lives and why, and then they're on the other side as well.
Yeah, and that's something that I was thrilled to learn, that God created our pets. They have souls also, and they make the transition just like we do. In fact, when we have that reunion after you come through that orientation center and you meet everybody that had passed before you, all your animals are there too. They're all there waiting for you.
Well, I got to tell you, the viewers are really happy to hear that. In
Yeah,
prior interviews that I've done where that's been mentioned, those definitely, the comments start lighting up. People love their animals, their pets, their children, everybody, right? But definitely their pets, and they love to hear that they are on the other side.
absolutely. Yep.
All right. Well, number 2, what lesson took you the longest to learn?
The lesson that took me the longest to learn was to forgive myself. I had a really hard time with, because when I was going through school, I had a learning disability, and it was really hard for me to learn and to retain information. And I outgrew that, but it was really hard in elementary school. And I used to be so hard on myself. And I after my NDE, I realized that we're all here to do our best, and we all are going to go through difficult, trying times, and you can't expect yourself to be perfect. Everybody goes through tough times here. That's why we're here. If you wanted to have a perfect life, you would have just stayed on the other side. So I had to learn that we all go through tough times, and if you didn't handle it the way you would have liked to, that's okay. You handle it the best way you knew how, and you just keep going forward. So that I think was the hardest lesson for me to learn.
Nice. Well, this word forgiveness to me is very interesting because it kind of ties into the notion of unconditional love. Like, if you have unconditional love, you wouldn't judge anyone, right? Because the only way you'd have to forgive someone or even yourself is if you judged someone or judged yourself, and then you finally work through all that, and then you release it, and then you forgive yourself,
Yes.
right? Now,
Yep.
if you somehow miraculously were able to live a life of unconditional love and never judge anything or anyone, including yourself, well, you'd never have to forgive yourself because you, kind of like on the other side, like we talked about before, certainly God doesn't judge you. And if you're in a life review, are you going to judge yourself or not judge yourself? Just learn and grow from the experiences you saw and not have to forgive yourself for anything because you're not judging yourself, but you are thankful for those experiences because you are all the better person for it.
Exactly. There's a do you remember Leo Biscaglia? Do you remember that name? He was a professor at USC, and he was an author, and he said that yesterday made us who we are today. Everything we go through in the past teaches us, and it makes us better people. So the past, even though it can sometimes be hard, we're always thankful for what we learned from it.
Exactly. I love that. And I went to USC for grad school,
Oh,
so
did
I'm
you
going to have to
really? Oh,
find,
fantastic.
yeah, I'm going to have to find that author.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. All right, the next question is what has grief taught you about life and love?
Wow. I've had a lot of grief actually. I lost my brother-in-law about 4 years ago. I lost my brother um, just about 2 years ago, and then in 2023, I lost my uncle and both my parents. And I always wondered how would I handle the loss of one of my parents because I had friends who had passed, but I had never lost an immediate family member. So I'd always wondered how was I going to handle it. Well, when my parents passed, my mom passed in October, and my dad passed 2 months later in December. And it was such a strange thing because I didn't have much grief, and I think the reason was because I knew where they went. I knew where they were. I knew how happy they would be and how much peace they would have. And I realized that it's only going to be a matter of time until I'm with them again. And that's the truth for all of us. Grief is something that everybody will go through. But I think for me personally, I was happier knowing how happy they were going to be than for me feeling a whole lot of grief. So I think that I didn't have to experience that so much because I have an advantage over a lot of people. I actually got to see what happens when we die. And I was just so relieved to know that they would be happy again. That had more power for me and more relief for me. And I didn't really have that much grief about it because I know what happens now.
Wow, it's because of the experience that you had. You're not only helping so many other people with this, but you had it sort of when you were 21, and so it allowed you through the rest of your life to do what they call practice what you preach. If you're
Exactly.
going to share this with other people, it had
Exactly.
really better sit home with you, and it sounds like it did for sure.
Yep. Yep.
Well, that really dovetails right into this next question because, would you consider home here or where your parents are? What does home mean to you now?
Home to me now is where we go back to. It's where we're from. It's where we were before we came here to Earth. And I wish that I had the language to describe what it's really like there. I don't have the language. I can't even begin to describe what it's like. It is so opposite to what we experience here on Earth. And it's kind of like being here on Earth is like coming to a battlefield, and you're in a foxhole without a radio, and you feel totally cut off from your source. The other side, or heaven, is the absolute opposite of that. If you could picture in your mind an absolute paradise where you are happy and joyful and experiencing so much peace, and you have that all the time, that's what it's like over there. It's almost like if you could imagine the best Christmas you've ever had with all of your family, relatives, people that you love, and it's a fantastic Christmas. If you could multiply that by 1,000, that's what it feels like on the other side. And I don't know how to explain it, but you can feel how much God loves you. It's the most extraordinary feeling I've ever felt. And I can't wait until I get to go back. I know that I'm here because I'm supposed to share what I learned, but I also know that Earth, that's not home. This isn't home for any of us. Home is where we go when we pass. And that's all by design. I know that for many people, death is the number one fear of humanity. And that's part of what I think they sent me back here to do, was to tell people that there's nothing to fear. That's how we get back home again. And it's going to be the best day of your life is your last day here. And that really is my most important message.
That's amazing. Now, how do you think it happened? How did this earthly plane that we live on get so infested with fear of death?
I don't know. I think a lot of it, I think, has to do with religion, because people have been told for centuries that there's going to be this judgment, that you're going to be sent someplace that, like hell, for example. And I think people are just fearful. Nobody has been able to tell them what happens when we die, except for these NDE people. Because when people pass, they go into the light and they don't come back. And when people have the near-death experience, they see the light, but they're told they have to go back. So I think what made mine so unique was that I was able to see what happens on the other side of that white light. That there's a reason for all of this. There's no accidents. We're all here for a specific reason and a specific purpose. And the fear of death has been with us since creation, I think. People have always been afraid of dying because we don't remember where we're from. And I think part of my message is to bring to people that there is really nothing to fear. It's natural. It's almost like, you know what it feels like? It feels like taking off a jacket when you get home from work, or stepping out of your car. That's what the actual death process feels like. And it's going to be the most joyous, happiest time, because the other side always sends somebody to get us. Nobody ever dies alone. Even if somebody passes by themselves in a nursing home or in a hospital, or they have an accident, some remote accident where they're alone, nobody dies alone. The other side always sends someone to get us.
Oh yeah, no, that's amazing, and then a lot of the NDE stories do account for that. The experience they have on the other side, meeting people either that they know and expected, or even past relationships and relatives and so forth of folks they had never met.
Yeah.
In this physical manifestation, but most likely in their soul group.
Yep.
And they'll kind of ease back into that notion. One other, this home question is a little bit of kind of two-dimensional, because not only is it, like you said, like that's probably the home. It's kind of like, I live in California, that's my home, but I'll vacation here and I'll vacation there and there and there, right? But the other dimension to this is if we're on the other side, or we're in physical manifestation, we still have the consciousness with us here, right?
Yes.
And so if that's the case, It kind of like when we go into meditation and we just remove all the noise, that's kind of home there too. It's kind of like we're traveling in a motorhome, so we always have, like a turtle, we always have our home with us.
Yeah,
But on the other side, it's the 12-story elaborate home with the pool, and on this side, it's just the motorhome. But we travel with home. So I think there's a couple of dimensions to the notion of home. We shouldn't feel like we want to rush through this physical manifestation and get to the other side,
yeah.
because that's home. But that is what it is, and this is what it is for a reason, and we're here for that reason.
Exactly. Yep. We are here. We're here for a specific reason, and the other side, they want us to be here to learn because they know that everybody comes here for their own specific reason, and they want us to do our best. In fact, I think people would be shocked if they really knew how many people are rooting for them on the other side. They know it's tough here. It is tough to be here, and there's so much support that we don't even realize until we finish our lifetime.
Yeah, if the lifetime is all super hyper connected and we're all one, and there is no sort of super bad on the other side at all, the only way you could have these experiences of negativity and polarity and angst and all this is to manifest into this world temporarily as a school, a university, to have experiences here you couldn't have on the other side. I guess even if you went into the libraries on the other side and you watched some videos, of, like you mentioned before, the cavalry and the Indians tangling and so on, you're sort of witnessing it, but you're not really experiencing it, and you got to come
Right.
here for that. Now, if that's the case, I got another question for you. How has your sense of purpose changed since your NDE?
That's been huge. Before I had my NDE, I was pretty clueless. I was 21. I really had no idea what I was here for. And the one thing I had always done that I learned from Catholicism was an active prayer life. I was always praying, even from childhood. I was always asking God, what am I supposed to do here? Is there some reason for my life? Is there a purpose for my life? And I had no idea until I had my NDE. And I realized that my purpose now is to share the information that they gave me. They didn't give it to me because I was some great spiritual person or anything like that. I'm the most average guy on the planet. But I think, like you said earlier, it was given to me to because they knew that I would share it, that it wasn't about me. It never was about me. The whole process was for me to share it and give it to other people, to take away the fear that so many of us have about dying, and also to let them know the people that are grieving. Like I get a lot of emails and texts from people who have lost loved ones, and they just want to know from me that I'm a real guy, that I'm not some AI, like artificial intelligence, but I'm a real person that knows that nobody really loses anybody. They're just in a different place. And that when your time comes, you're all going to be reunited again. And I have people who write to me all the time who just want to talk and know that it's real and that the pain isn't going to last forever, that the loved ones really aren't gone. They're just in a different place.
Since this happened to you when you were 21, and there's been many years where you've had an opportunity to share this, uh, what's the percentage of time you're able to spend toward doing this? I mean, it probably isn't your primary occupation.
Correct.
You might have a job doing something else that you know and love, and then you do this as often as you can. How would you describe that mix?
I have a kind of a regular job, and I try to do these things on pretty much on the weekends or in the evenings. But I don't make any, I don't have an income from this. It's not a job really. We all still have bills to pay and expenses, and this is just something that I do whenever I can. And I try to make myself available to anybody. In fact, I'll give you at the end of the show, remind me, and I'll give you my web address and my email so that any of your listeners, if they want to ask me questions or just talk, I'm more than happy to talk with them anytime.
That would be a huge help because that's exactly what happens. There will be comments coming in, and folks will grab the web address or the email and reach out. There's so many people that really need to hear your message. Now, that's the beauty of this recording because it's one to many. And sometimes folks have just a very specific question to ask you.
Sure.
And so it's wonderful that you make yourself available for that. Thank you. And another question I've got is what spiritual truth feels more alive for you today?
The most spiritual truth for me is that we are all connected. We are all children of God. And I think what that makes me feel like is I want to give people as much encouragement as I can because we're all here to do our best. We all are on the same path. We want to grow, we want to learn, we want to develop. And I feel the most alive when I can encourage people, encourage them to never give up, to keep going. In fact, there's something that I'll tell your audience that happened to me about 9 years ago when my wife's dad died. His name was Jack. And 3 days after he died, I had a dream. And what's so interesting about this dream is that, again, I usually have a pretty bad memory, but I remember every detail about this dream. And he came to me and he said, everything is going to be okay. We're all going to be together again. There are no accidents, and give it everything you've got. And that's something that I have tried to do in my own life, to give it everything I've got, but to also try to encourage others to never give up, to keep fighting, and to do your best. Because we are all here pretty much with the same idea. We're all trying to improve and to get better and to help each other along the way. So I would say that is probably the most spiritual truth that makes me feel the most alive.
Well, that's amazing because that actually sort of answers this last question a little bit too, which is if you could share one message to all of humanity, what would it be? Now, that's certainly a strong message there. I don't know if you have an additional one that you typically find at the top of the list.
I think it would be how important you are to God. The feeling that we are cherished and loved. And I can't even begin to explain it. If for any of your listeners that have children, they can have an idea of when you love your child, that's how God feels about us. The absolute love that we feel. And there are so many people here on earth that don't feel love. They may not have a family, they may not have a lot of friends, and they feel alone. If I could just share that one truth that no one's ever really alone. God is there, and he loves us so much more than people realize. And that's one of the things that I want to share with people, that you're never alone. There's so much support and so many people are rooting for us, and especially God. Everybody's loved and cherished.
Yeah, that is really amazing because the primary message is that there is no death. Now, if they start to grok that message quite a bit, then that erodes away against the fear. Maybe their fear starts to lessen significantly. There is no death. Now that the fear is lessened, the secondary message you can pop in now that they'll probably listen more with the fear gone is you're loved, eternally, by God. And hopefully after that, they'll actually get to almost the third point, which is you need to love yourself eternally also.
Yes,
and
exactly.
then if you got that, everybody in the world would be like out with smiles on their face, and there would be, well, then it would be like the other side, I guess.
Exactly. You're exactly right, Brad. That's perfect. The perfect analogy.
Well, that sounds like a good place to me. As I grew up as a kid, I often said, could you stop the planet? I want to get off.
Yep,
this is not the place for me. But again, I chose this life, chose these challenges, and to live in this crazy world. So, I'm going to stick it out to the end. Well, and speaking of the end, we are at that point where it's a great time to share your website and your email address and how folks can contact you.
Yeah, the website actually is really good because there's a friend of mine was able to use AI, and she found pictures of a lot of the things that I saw. It's on my website, and it's John J. Davis, NDE.com. And they can go there, and my email address, if they want to reach out to me, I write back to everybody. It's John J. Davis 65 at icloud.com.
Outstanding. I will have that in the description down below, so you'll definitely find it there.
Fantastic.
And encourage you, if you'd like to leave some comments, do that. John will see them, I'll see them, as well as reach out to him if you like also. So thank you. Hey, John, thank you for this profound glimpse into the eternal world that awaits us, and for reminding us that life, no matter how hard, has purpose and is divinely guided. You've lived your mission to tell us there is no death and that there is eternal love, and we're better for it. So may your story continue to plant seeds of hope in every heart that hears it, and we certainly hope there's a lot of folks that check this out, as well as leave us some beautiful comments as well. So, John, any final messages to the viewers and the listeners?
Never give up. I know when times seem the darkest, ask God to lead you through it. He'll be there. He will help you. They all know there are tough times for us, but you're never alone. Just give it everything you've got. Never give up, and know that when your life comes to an end, when your life is finished, you're going to go home again, and you're only going to have love and peace and joy.
Those are the three magic words. I love that message of never give up. It's kind of like the notion of this too shall pass.
Yes.
Anytime you're into any angst, it seems terrible, it's not going to stick around.
Exactly.
Right? This too shall pass. Never give up. Move through it and go to love and peace.
Exactly. Fantastic.
Thank you, John. And thank you for joining us on this profound journey. If you found this conversation enlightening like we did, be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and leave all your comments. We reply to all of them. And until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and go beyond the illusion to discover your true self. Take care, everyone, and bye for now.
That was fantastic. You're awesome at this.
Yeah?
Yeah, I love the things that you say. That was fantastic.
Well, I thought we were a good team, man.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Well, Brad, I want to thank you so much. This is one of my most favorite podcasts I've been on. You are fantastic at this. I hope you can do this for years to come.